Hey y'all, I'm James Wright and welcome to the shop. Today I want to make a ring. This has been on my list for a long time and I finally bit the bullet and jumped into it. I was very afraid of it because it's a delicate, easy thing to break, and I had a bunch of ideas how to do it with just hand tools. Normally a lathe would be absolutely perfect and you could clean it up and true it up easily, but spring pull lathe and this just weren't working out in my brain. So how do we actually do it with hand tools? That's what I want to look at. Just a couple simple hand tools, and you can make a ring. Let's have some fun. I decided to use a scrap that I stabilized a long time ago. And you may remember all this footage from a video that I did teaching how to stabilize wood. I'll try and leave a link to that down below. But it is an interesting way of taking wood that is a little bit punky or isn't great for other uses, and then making it stable and filling it up so number one, it doesn't expand and contract, but number two, you can use it for a lot of other things. And for a delicate little piece like this, stabilization is fantastic. So I'm not going to go into the stabilization process particularly, as I have a whole video on that. But let's take this scrap that I made several other things with, and let's actually turn this into a ring. Now, I didn't have to stabilize it. I could have done it with just about any other wood that works pretty well. I wouldn't want to do it out of pine, but any like maple or purple heart or something like that would work very well for this. Now, the problem was I actually tested the hole to see would it fit, slid it onto my finger, and I could not get it off my finger, and it was starting to make my finger turn blue. And it slid on there really easily, but it wouldn't come out. So I had to have my daughter come down and actually chisel it off for me. So it's a lot of trusting for your daughter to swing a mallet while you try and hold a chisel in place with one hand. But eventually we broke a little bit here, and I was able to pull out this chunk and then break off the extra and get my finger back out of this. Yeah, it was one of those weird things that you don't expect to happen in the shop. I didn't cut myself. I wasn't really in danger. It was just an odd situation. So be careful if you test a ring on your finger, make sure you can get it out. So the first thing I want to do is take this chunk and plane it down to get a nice and smooth surface. And I want to take it down to the thickness I want for the ring. And it ended up being about 3/8 of an inch wide. So that felt about right for a ring. I might make one a little bit thinner next time, but it was a nice, good, manly ring feel to it. So once I smooth down the one side and then flip it over and smooth the other side, then we can start to do some work on this. I was thinking originally about cutting the outside circle and then cutting the inside circle, but the problem is it might split out. And that's why I'm driving a pilot hole here. That way the lead screw on this doesn't want to split the wood as much because some of the material has been taken out. I didn't make it too big so that the lead screw wouldn't pull, but just enough so that the lead screw on the auger would interact with it and cut the hole. Drill it from one side. Once the screw is sticking out the other side, then flip it over and drill from the other side. That way you get a nice clean cutout on both sides. And now we have our hole. You can check it, just make sure your finger doesn't get stuck. Now I want to make one for the outside diameter. So I found a circle that was about the right size and drew that on there. And that gave me something to cut down to. And I went back and forth with a bunch of ideas of, do I plane down to this? Do I cut down to it? Do I use a chisel and carve down to it? I think next time I might actually make a ring and chisel different facets into it. But on this one I decided to take the coping saw and just take the safe way out. So I'm just going to cut around this. And it looks like something that might be really tedious, but this honestly took less than a minute and a half to cut all the way around the circle and pop out. And it's a very pleasing thing when you make those last couple strokes and the thing goes pop. Here we go, ready? Pop. So there, we've got a ring, and it just needs to be a little prettier. I want to smooth it out, clean it out, and make it nicer. To hold on to little things, it's often really useful to get a hand screw and clamp that in the vise, and then you can work the screws to hold little items on here. So if you're working with like handles or knobs or things like that where you want to do some file work, this actually works really, really well. And it holds it in place nicely so that I can then take a series of files. And I'm just working with very, very fine files because I don't want to take off a lot of material. I just want to bring it back to the line and take my time with it. It's better to take off too little than too much. So working around it, trying to round the corners, and working all the way around the surface. Also, you want to make sure you don't put too much pressure on it to snap it. I had a test piece that I was playing with earlier, just a thin scrap, and I ended up snapping that, so it kind of gave me an idea for how much pressure do I need to put on it. But if I did snap it, I probably would just fix it up with some CA. I don't think that would be too much of an issue. So work it out, bring it to that line, and then we can start to do some of the detail work. For a lot of the detail work, I found it was better to hold the file and then run the ring around it. And I'm just taking off the outside edge, the outside surface, and I want to smooth it down and get rid of any marks from the coarse file that I was just using before. This is a little bit finer file. And sometimes I will be going the correct direction on the file, and sometimes I will be going the incorrect direction on the file. I know the horrors of that, but sometimes going against the grain on the file will actually give you a smoother surface. Then I have a small file that I come in to clean out the inside. I could have done this with a rat tail or something of that nature, but this one has a really, really fine cut on it, so it allows me to smooth it out. The inside actually took me a lot longer than I expected. I was expecting it to take just a little bit because I was going to keep it fairly flat other than a little chamfer around the outside. But this took me probably a good 10-15 minutes. It was probably the longest single step of this build was smoothing out the inside. I'm not quite sure why that is. Probably to do with having a really, really fine file, but making sure that all the marks were gone was very important. And then I'm just going to give it a slight chamfer around the edge. You can see I have it on an angle here, and then I can make it feel comfortable. Then we're going to go back to the file and do some detailing on it. I had it flat on the outside, and now I actually want to round it off and give it a what they call a comfort fit, which is basically just a rounded oval in cross section. So going at it up and down and back and forth, and just one by one checking it and testing it and checking it and testing it. And again, you can see sometimes I'm going the wrong direction of the file, and that just gives it a cleaner cut. It's much like pulling the saw back to start a kerf. It's not perfectly great for the file, but it's not bad. And will give you a little bit smoother surface if your files are not quite fine enough. Then I'm going to come back at it with my really fine file and just detail the outside. Running around it, making sure that all the little scratches are gone, everything feels good, everything's smooth, and it's just about the way it wants. Now, I was originally planning on just doing it with the file and then finishing it. But then I thought, you know what, I'm going to actually give this a try with some high grit sandpaper. So I went from the file to a 400 grit sandpaper, which was this. And then from the 400 grit, I went to 1,000 grit, I think it was. Cleaning out the inside was actually a little bit more of a challenge than I was expecting. Just being able to get it in there and doing a good work with that, wrapping around the finger. It took a little bit of practice, but it was finally there. So then we move on to the 1,000 grit paper, and things start to look pretty good here. After the 1,000 grit, I didn't get it on paper, but I wet it down and let the grain raise, and then came back to the 1,000 grit again. And then again hit the inside. And then after the 1,000 grit, I think it went up to 2,000 grit, buffing that out. And I really spent my time on this. I wanted to make sure I got rid of all the scratches from the previous step before going into the next one. Because if you have a scrap step leaving scratches earlier, you're not going to be able to get that out with the finer grits later on. Then I finished it up with the 3,000 grit sanding sponge paper that I have. And this got really close, and I was thinking about leaving it there, but I was like, no, let's actually give it a chance with the Yorkshire grit. And this is often used for turning. It needs a bit of friction to do that. But I found that if I embedded the Yorkshire grit in the towel and then rubbed the ring on the towel, I could get that friction that was needed and really buff this out and shine it. And I was very happy with how this came through. About this point, every time I'd wipe a little bit off and it'd be shiny, I'd be like, ooh, I'm getting excited here. So I just keep rubbing and checking until I got the polish just the way I wanted it. And I'm really, really happy with this. You can clean it off with a rag and you expect that shine to disappear, but that shine is just the wood. The wood is actually polished to that level. There's no finish on there, and I am really, really happy with this. Looking forward to playing with it for years to come. So yeah, a wooden ring made mostly with hand tools and just a little bit of fun. A good day, good time in the shop. So there you go. I am in love with how this came out. The live oak is absolutely gorgeous with the rays running through it. Just a beautiful, beautiful ring. I didn't put any finish on it. And I know a lot of people are like, oh, you didn't finish it. No, because number one, it is stabilized. So the resin in there has filled the pores and done a fairly good job of finishing it. Number two, if you polish it up, the wood is actually really good. And live oak is a rot resistant wood and will last a long, long time. So finish is just something that can go bad over time, and there's really no need for it on this. Especially with it being on the hand and constantly rubbing up against the skin, you'll keep it buffed that way. So I hope you like this video. This was a really fun one for me. I may end up trying something a little different in the future. Maybe I'll make a smaller one for my wife. You can actually make it a little bit more challenging. I don't know, we'll give it a try. If you have any thoughts, comments, or suggestions, leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear those. I do like hearing suggestions. A lot of times I get some good ideas about other ways to do things in the future. So I think that's about it for today. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Okay, you knew the joke was coming. Here it is. If you like it, then you should have made a ring for it.